Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to our webinar today, Law on TV versus Real Life. My name is Judy Feng. I'm a staff lawyer here at the Centre for Public Legal Education Alberta, or CPLEA for short. And before we start, we want to thank our funders, the Alberta Law Foundation, the Department of Justice Canada, and the Alberta Real Estate Foundation for making initiatives like this possible today. We also respectfully acknowledge that we are located across Treaty 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10 territories and respect the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our communities. So here at CPLEA, we know that people learn about the law from all kinds of places. The internet, media, friends and family, and of course, TV shows. But TV doesn't always tell the whole story. So today we're busting some of the biggest myths about what legal shows get wrong about evidence, trials, lawyers, and how the justice system actually works. And fair warning, our webinar will have some commentary today. And some of that commentary might hit close to home for certain TV favorites. So as they say on TV, viewer discretion is advised. And as always, our webinars are legal information only and not meant to be legal advice. We may not get to audience questions at the end of today, just as we just have a lot to talk about, but we will be sending out a follow-up email with resources that may be helpful to all of you. So joined with me today is a guest in both worlds, a law student who has worked in the film industry previously, Lindsey Zess. So Lindsey, if you want to pop on camera right now and introduce yourself. That's
Hello there.
yeah, that's a very interesting choice.
Thank you, Judy. I never pass up an opportunity to get into character. So, got my robe, got my wig going. Like Judy said, I was once upon a time a costume designer working in film and theater, but I'm now a law student at the University of Alberta. And I have the privilege of working alongside the lawyers at CPLEA this year for one of my courses. So I'm very excited to learn more about what being a lawyer really entails because before I started law school, most of what I knew, I'm going to be honest, I learned from Legally Blonde. So, Judy, what is your favorite legal TV show?
I have to say, before law school and the practice of law essentially ruined all legal TV shows for me. My favorites were Law and Order and The Good Wife, especially The Good Wife. It's very woman-centered storytelling and just really smart screenwriting. Now, that's why, I'm here today channeling my inner Diane Lockhart for any Good Wife fans out there with this outfit. So, how about you?
Personally, I don't like to get stressed out in my spare time. Law school is plenty stressful already. So I love a very specific genre, which is legal comedies and legal musical comedies, even better. So Drop Dead Diva is one of my personal favorites. I don't know if anybody's seen that show. And I also really loved Ally McBeal back in the day.
Ally McBeal. It was such a
Classic.
fun, yeah, legal rom-com from the 90s. So we want to hear from everyone else. Like, what about everyone else? What was your favorite legal TV show or favorite legal TV show as you're watching these days? Um, we have a couple of choices there, so please feel free to weigh in on what your favorites are or were or what you're watching now.
Oh, do I get to vote? I get to vote too. You
Yeah, you
already
get to
heard my
vote too.
vote.
You get to vote, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, while we're waiting for folks to weigh in, I'll tell you a little bit about our format for the webinar today. It's going to be a bit different if you've attended past webinars. We're really leaning into the role play, as you can see. So today we're going to present each case, each myth as a case that's coming before the court. The image behind me you're seeing here is the Supreme Court of Canada. And in Canada, we have what is called an adversarial legal system. So this is where two opposing parties present their case and evidence before a judge or a jury who ultimately decides the outcome. And the idea is seeking truth through conflict. So today as well, our court clerk Jessica will hold up physical exhibits on the third screen there with the CPLEA logo. So you'll see some of our exhibits come on to provide evidence for each case. And you, our lovely viewers today, are going to be the jury. So review our submissions carefully and let us know if you're convinced that each myth is busted.
All right. Do we have any answers from the audience poll? Jessica.
Can you see the answers to the poll, or is it just me?
I can't see the answers to the poll.
No,
Right
we
now,
cannot.
Law and Order is winning.
Law
Oh,
and
Law
Order
and
in the
Order is winning.
lead.
Okay, so we have some Law and Order fans here. Okay, great. Yeah.
And then second place is a three-way tie with The Good Wife / The Good Fight, Better Call Saul, and Ally McBeal.
Oh,
Nice.
wonderful, wonderful. You are fans. Definitely are fans of what we like. Okay, fantastic. Okay, Lindsey, why don't you take it away with the first case then?
Absolutely. So, starting off in my area of expertise, we're going to talk about courtroom attire. So, this is the case of pink and robes. Now, this first exhibit you're going to see here is a classic scene from Legally Blonde, where Elle Woods sort of saves the day, gets her groove back, and wins the day in court wearing her signature color, that beautiful hot pink. So, this myth that we tend to see on TV is lawyers dressed to impress in expensive suits. But in reality, many court appearances require lawyers to wear very specific garments called gowns or robes. And this is kind of an important one because it illustrates how the American legal system is different from the Canadian legal system. We have different rules of court. So important to sort of understand the difference. But so court attire actually varies from province to province. So we'll talk about Alberta, and that is where lawyers usually wear business attire. So usually a suit for most of their court appearances, but they generally wear robes kind of like this. So a black robe when presenting live evidence with witnesses in the Court of King's Bench or the Courts of Appeal. So sometimes robes are worn, whereas lawyers in BC have to wear robes in the majority of their court appearances and can't actually appear in court at all if they don't meet the dress code.
It brings me a thought here. So for some lawyers, the only time that we will ever wear a robe is actually at our own bar call when we are admitted as lawyers. So why do lawyers in Canada wear robes in the first place then?
This is a really old tradition. It dates back to the court rules from England in the 1600s. So some of those rules are still sticking around. Some of them have gone by the wayside. But lawyers and judges in England still wear robes and wigs in court, actually. So I think this is where the idea of a judge wearing a wig comes from, is that it still happens in English courts. But people who support the idea of a legal dress code, whether that be the robe or other things, support the idea that lawyers and judges want to be neutral in the courtroom, so it sort of visually separates them from everybody else. And keeping a uniform look for lawyers is supposed to eliminate biases based on appearances. So at the end of the day, if Elle's big murder trial was here in Alberta, she would unfortunately need to appear in robes. And unfortunately for Elle, they do not come in pink.
But no wig though.
No wig.
No wig. Yeah.
It's not required, which is great because like this is not most people's most flattering hair color.
Mhm.
So what do you think? Is this myth busted sufficiently? We're going to move on to the next case, slightly related, the case of Scheindlin and Gavel. So speaking of robes, what do you picture when you think of a judge normally? You think of the iconic TV personality Judge Judy. Does anybody remember her? The black robe and gavel usually is what people picture. I mean, this is it's a mallet, but we'll call it a gavel for TV. So there's a very, very common myth that judges preside over their courtroom using a wooden gavel. But in reality, the gavel is not used in Canadian courts at all, or most American courts for that matter, but it's really popularized. We still see it on TV a lot. Even Judge Judy, as you can see in the exhibit, did not use a gavel on her TV shows in her court proceedings. But that image is so pervasive in people's minds that many people have false memories of Judy using a gavel on her show. And I think it's pervasive in part due to its repetition through popular culture, like The Simpsons, etc. But Judge Judy did often bang on her desk with a pen or a coffee cup to get that similar effect, probably because it made for some really good dramatic TV.
When we were planning this webinar, I think we had this moment where we realized that maybe I should have been presenting the Judge Judy case. But yeah, we didn't want to play into any stereotypes here, so we're kind of trying to avoid that. Anyhow.
All right, so we know now in Canada, no wigs, no gavels. I sentenced the gavel to life in prison with no possibility of parole. And I sentenced this outfit to the laundry basket because it's really stuffy. So I'm gonna make a quick costume change and I will be right back.
All right. So for all of you Law and Order fans out there, doesn't it feel just so satisfying to wrap things up quickly? And that ties into our next case. A swift justice and due process. So many legal TV shows rely on a case of the week structure. Okay, this format requires a rapid, decisive resolution so that there can be a new story next week. So you pop up with the exhibit there, common scene from Law and Order in the 90s, right? You see this in Law and Order series and even the more modern legal TV shows too. You rarely see a case or file that goes on for multiple episodes, let alone for years. So really, in essence, what you get from TV is this myth that legal cases are resolved quickly with speedy trial processes and verdicts. But the reality is that legal processes are lengthy, and getting a case to trial is governed by many rules of court. Now, the speed of legal process is highly compressed in these TV shows, and investigations and trials in real life often take weeks, months, or even years of preparation and procedural wrangling. And this is especially true for our criminal justice system. So in the 2016 case of R and Jordan, the Supreme Court of Canada recognized that criminal defendants were waiting far too long to have their cases resolved. So now there's a ceiling on how long they have to wait for trial before a case is stayed. So that's 18 months at provincial court or 30 months at a superior court for criminal trials. Legal processes are also lengthy for our civil justice system. The Alberta Court of King's Bench has acknowledge that it's often a year or more between the conclusion of pre-trial steps and the trial itself for civil matters. And the Alberta Court of King's Bench now actually requires all new civil cases filed after September 1st, 2025 to include a litigation plan targeting trial within 36 months.
36 months is a long time, but that's just an aspirational target, right? So, because as I understand it, even for basic civil disputes, many Albertans have to wait years to have their dispute scheduled and heard by the courts. Is that right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And one important thing that's glossed over in all these TV shows, I think, are court rules. Okay, so the Alberta Rules of Court are the rules that govern practice and procedure of everyone who comes before the courts. And their whole purpose is to make sure that claims are resolved fairly, justly, and in theory, in a timely and cost-effective way. Now, in fact, we have these two tomes, Volume 1 and Volume 2, each over 700 pages long, covering everything from limitation periods to procedure to evidence and much more. So I've been instructed by our production team to hold these out kind of like those influencer videos peddling like beauty products. So yeah, just for you to check this out. So every aspiring baby litigator has probably heard this advice from their articling principal, especially the ones dreaming of being fierce litigator types, to read these rules front to back, then back to front, and then maybe one more time just in case. Okay. And the rules of court are only part of the picture. They're responsible for how some evidence can be used in court, but there are also other rules that shape what actually happens with evidence at trial.
Right. That brings us to our next case, the case of happenstance and evidence. So the myth here that's really common is that good lawyers save the day by bringing in crucial last-minute evidence, but in reality, there are rules that explicitly prohibit this from happening in court. So the source of this, Matlock, both the original and the 2024 reboot. We see this in Legally Blonde. We see this in so many legal shows, but it really gives a skewed perspective of the role of evidence in legal proceedings. Pictured here, we have both the original and the new Kathy Bates Matlock, so Andy Griffith and Kathy Bates, both playing not the same character, actually, but this show, Matlock, really blurs the line between lawyer and detective. So in the new reboot, Mattie is a lawyer practicing under a false identity. Big red flag. She's trying to collect evidence against a law firm to implicate them in the death of her daughter. So very dramatic. The problem with this is that legal professionals are not authorized to collect evidence in the same way that police are, and they couldn't testify in court to having collected it. So that's a big problem. And then the original.
Oh, Lindsay, I think you cut out a little bit there.
truth at the last minute. Again, classic legal dramas like A Few Good Men and Legally Blonde use this exact formula, but in real life, evidence cannot be spontaneously admitted into court proceedings. So aside from the rules of court, which Judy showed, the Canada Evidence Act applies to all criminal trials. It has lengthy rules too about physical evidence and witness testimony. And Section 5 sub 2 of that act states that an incriminating statement that's made by a witness in court cannot be used as admissible evidence in a criminal trial against them. So if we get a big dramatic courtroom confession, you can't use that as evidence in another trial. So it would be a real bad move to pull that out.
Yeah, and as we already touched on, there are also rules about evidence in other types of trials too. So, Lindsey, I think what's the final truth about evidence that you think everyone should know about? And this is like that time for that cheesy line that Tom Cruise said in A Few Good Men. I want the truth.
You can't handle the truth. It's classic. So really, at the end of the day, the final word on evidence is that discovery, so that means that sort of like revealing of evidence and disclosure of evidence to the opposite side is a long and arduous process. So attention to detail and smart legal minds are key in reviewing evidence, but as opposed to what happens on TV, this work happens long before ever entering the courtroom. So that being said, let's talk about what real life lawyering actually looks like.
Okay, and I'm supposed to tell you this, right? So as a
Hopefully.
qualifier, yes, I'm
Help
supposed
me, Judy.
Yes, yes, with all my expertise. So as a qualifier here, I've been practicing in-house for 10 years now at CPLEA and even had some brief stints in firms doing mostly corporate commercial work before landing here. So in a nutshell, I can say real life lawyering doesn't look like anything of what you see on TV. But before we get to that point, I just want to take a moment to appreciate how much TV shapes public perceptions of lawyers in the justice system. In a very ironic and roundabout way, those TV lawyers, the legal show producers and writers, they actually create work for us. They help keep us employed at plea organizations, public legal education information organizations like CPLEA, because someone has to explain reality, right? And debunk all the legal misinformation out there. So anyhow, that's a little bit of a tangent, but let's get back to our case about real life lawyering. So, Specters and Solicitors. Jessica, if you want to pull up some exhibits there. Okay. So, one of these different characters and iconic shows you see on TV, you may have this impression that lawyers are highly aggressive, combative, working on high stakes files and environments all the time. In reality, there are all sorts of lawyers. But with this exhibit that we have here, this is Harvey Specter from Suits, right? That's kind of like one archetypical lawyer that you see on TV. There's also Alan Shore from Boston Legal, if anyone remembers those Boston Legal days. And of course, for all of you Law and Order fans, Jack McCoy from the Law and Order series, Hang 'em High McCoy, the prosecutor who was aggressive in seeking justice, and also the longest running lawyer character on the TV show from 1994 to 2010. So 16 seasons he was there, right? And, lawyers, like I mentioned, they're portrayed as really these certain archetypes. And there's two main archetypes on TV. I'd say this ferocious litigator type, usually of the criminal law variety, either as a prosecutor or a criminal defense lawyer, or a high stakes deal maker, right? So the Harvey from Suits type. So whether it's a ferocious litigator or deal maker, they're often portrayed as fast talking, aggressive lawyers who will use any tactic, ethical or not, to win a case or deal, and they're often portrayed as workaholics who put victory or billing above all else. And these portrayals often focus on like that, that high stakes drama, and also sensational courtroom or boardroom moments and moral compromise, which really tends to exaggerate the combative and cutthroat aspects of the profession for really just entertainment purposes.
So, and then this myth really makes lawyers feel like either heroes or a lot of times villains, but never real people, which isn't good for anybody.
Exactly, right? And these portrayals perpetuate lawyer stereotypes and also the work that we do. There are all sorts of lawyers in different practice settings with different expertise, everyday work, and believe it or not, different values and personalities.
Okay, so what do you think is common across the board for all lawyers, if there are all sorts? Can you point to any accurate portrayals of lawyers on TV shows?
Ugh, accurate portrayals of lawyers on TV. Okay, my own personal opinion, probably none. But I have to say, in reality, hey, what's common across the board for most lawyers is that we help solve problems, we help assess and mitigate risk to prevent future issues from hopefully happening again, and we also advocate for our clients, whether it be an individual or organizational or institutional client. One thing that's a little bit glossed over, of course, in all these legal TV shows is that lawyers practice in all sorts of settings. So what you often see on TV are lawyers in private practice. So in reality, though, lawyers in private practice often specialize in a certain area of law, and it's very rare to find like these general practitioners who are competent, like whiz kids in various areas of law that you often see on TV. And of course, with lawyers that practice in private practice, they're providing services to clients for a fee. There's also lawyers that work in-house. That's like us at CPLEA. We can't give legal advice to the public as we're not insured to do so. We would actually be in big trouble if we were giving legal advice to the public. And, for lawyers who practice in-house, their one and only client is their organization entity itself. There's also lawyers that practice in government, advising government ministries and agencies, or drafting legislation. And even in our access to justice space, you have lawyers working in legal clinics, advocating for the most vulnerable, lawyers working in law reform, lawyers in systemic education and prevention projects. And you also have lawyers not working in law at all. So I'd say, the everyday work that lawyers do, especially when they are junior, is seemingly unglamorous tasks like research, writing, reading up and learning the law, interpreting laws, reviewing documents, the going to court, client development and meetings, that sexy strategizing that you see on TV, and then high stakes negotiation and all that other stuff, the perceived high stakes work isn't something that all lawyers are even involved in or interested in. And depending on what area they work in and also their seniority, that could differ, right? And even then, for lawyers that do that work, it's nowhere near as dramatic or sensational as portrayed on TV. I would love a realistic montage on TV of lawyers doing document review, staring into a computer screen all day long, and law students, and Lindsey, you'll probably relate to this, reading case law until their eyes literally pop out.
Yeah, just like disintegrate into dust.
Yeah, yeah. And it would involve hours of redlining, which is really just a fancy term for reviewing, editing, and marking up documents, or probably crying into a highlighter, for a little bit of dramatic effect, wondering what they are doing with their life.
I've absolutely been doing that, especially at exam time. So it sounds like I have a lot to look forward to after graduating. Law work sounds really, really exciting. Also, something that we didn't bring up, Judy, is that I think TV shows often portray that lawyers know every aspect of law. That you can ask them a legal question about anything and they'll know. But there's also you mentioned people's specialization. Some people know a lot about very, very small. There's so much law to know. No one lawyer can give you advice on across the board. It's something that I think a myth that gets perpetuated by TV shows as well. But we also wanted to talk about how legal TV shows misrepresent the role of non-lawyers in legal proceedings, including law students like myself. So our next case is the case of Antics and ethics. So the myth here is that anyone who is smart enough can do lawyer's work, but that's just not the case. This is perpetuated very, very strongly in shows like Suits. So pictured here in our exhibit is Rachel, the character from Suits, who starts out as a paralegal. And fun fact, when she premiered on the show, this caused a massive uptick in Google searches for paralegal careers. But the reality here is that in Alberta, there are rules about who can be a lawyer, who can practice law and provide legal services. So a lot of what we see in Suits is not accurate. There is a governing framework for how and who can practice as a lawyer in Alberta. So paralegals and legal assistants definitely have a very important role in law firms, but the role is seriously misrepresented in these legal shows. For example, you sometimes see legal assistants, again, being detectives, collecting data, operating under a false identity, snooping around. They also spend little to no time in the courtroom where TV shows show them as active participants in court proceedings. Again, they're doing a lot of that reading, writing, typing up paperwork. But the worst and most harmful part of this category of myth is that legal dramas often show law students and paralegals giving legal advice or making representations in court, which is absolutely a no-go. Like Elle Woods being a first-year law student, representing someone in court in Legally Blonde, or in Suits where Mike Ross has no legal training whatsoever, but becomes a legal associate at a firm. That should never happen in real life.
Well, actually, Lindsay, there has been at least one situation many, many years ago in Alberta where a person who did not go to law school and wasn't even called to the bar ended up practicing law somehow in the public sector. I'm not going to name any names. So it's all on
real
public
life Mike
record.
Ross.
No, it's all on public record if you do some digging online, but that's a story for another day. So yes, in reality, you are not supposed to see that happen. But if you do, that's a real problem.
Yikes. Okay. So in Alberta, the governing framework says only active members of the Law Society can practice as a lawyer and provide legal advice. And then students at law can provide limited legal services under the supervision of a lawyer, again, under certain conditions set out in the rules of the Law Society. Now, this is also confusing because students at law are also called articling students. You might have heard that term. So it can be a little confusing because articling students have finished their law school and are basically working to become a lawyer under supervision, but they're not the same as law students like myself, still in school, still taking courses.
Hey, so we mentioned governing framework a couple of times. So not only is there a governing framework for who can do a lawyer's work and practicing as a lawyer, Alberta's lawyers are expected to conduct themselves and their law practices ethically following the code of conduct.
Okay, so what happens when there is a breach of the code of conduct? Because we know that happens.
Okay, so we're moving on to our next case, the Wild Wild West and Oversight. So you might have noticed by now that in every legal TV show, or pretty much every legal TV show, they usually significantly downplay lawyer oversight for the sake of drama and narrative focus. And it seems like the main characters can get away with their questionable conduct. So we have an exhibit here. I'm picking on Harvey today. Harvey, right? So Harvey often faced disbarment many times for his dubious methods and maneuvering, but he always managed to escape, right? Like that oversight. We also have Mike Ross from Suits. So I'm picking on the characters from Suits again, right? As Lindsay already mentioned, his initial career was a fraud on TV. He did not graduate college, never went to law school, was practicing law without a license. Hey, and even with The Good Wife, you had the main characters doing some things that may have looked a little bit questionable, but they were never actually disbarred or under any type of regulatory scrutiny for their conduct. So really, with these shows, sometimes you get this impression that, oh, lawyers can get away with all this questionable conduct. But in reality, the Law Society of Alberta is our independent regulator of the profession, and they have a governing framework for lawyer conduct. Okay. So in Canada, here's the truth for you. Okay, lawyers don't operate in this wild, wild west environment like we often see on TV. Okay, so every province and territory has an independent regulator for the legal profession. So if you're a lawyer, you must be a member of your province's law society and follow its rules. So here in Alberta, as I mentioned, our regulator is the Law Society of Alberta, and they protect the public by making sure that lawyers meet high professional and ethical standards and also maintain public confidence in the profession. And the Law Society gets its authority from what we call the Legal Profession Act. That's a piece of legislation. And that legislation sets out their mandate, gives them responsibility for regulating over 9,000 lawyers. So there's 9,000 of us practicing and also non-practicing in the province. And they set expectations and standards for us in two main ways. So number one, the code of conduct, which lays out the ethical principles and high standards expected of all Alberta lawyers. And it covers everything from confidentiality, conflicts of interest, duties to the court and clients, etc. And also, number two, the rules of the Law Society, which sets out specific regulations, responsibilities, and professional standards that all lawyers are required to meet and uphold. So it also gets into like more of like these nuts and bolts of things, like how lawyers can get admitted, duties of lawyers in their law firms, and also professional conduct and disciplinary procedures. And the Legal Profession Act also includes some big picture standards. So for example, we have Section 49 that says that a lawyer can face sanctions for doing anything arising from incompetence or otherwise that harms the public interest or the reputation of their profession. So even if that conduct has nothing to do with their actual practice, and even if it happened outside of Alberta.
Right. I remember this happened a few years ago with a very well-respected Canadian judge who is on vacation in the States. So sometimes what happens in Vegas doesn't stay in Vegas. That's a lot of pressure for lawyers to be under.
Yeah, yeah. And another thing to keep in mind too is that when the lawyers are called to the bar, and Lindsey, you'll go through this one day as well, is that we pledge to conduct ourselves truly and with integrity in all things, and what we must be held accountable to that pledge.
Okay, so what specifically happens if anyone has a concern about a lawyer's conduct?
Okay, so the Law Society can address many different kinds of lawyer conduct concerns through their complaint process. There's even, for example, a safe reporting option for complaints about discrimination or harassment. Um, Other lawyers, articling students, even law firm staff members can report complaints to the Law Society uh, about discrimination, harassment complaint to the equity ombudsperson. For a little bit more information about what type of conduct concerns that the Law Society may be involved in, maybe perhaps looking into, you could take a look at their website. But really, very briefly here, when a complaint is made, it's assigned to a conduct counsel at the Law Society who reviews it carefully under our governing framework. So like I already mentioned, the Legal Profession Act, Code of Conduct, and also the rules of the Law Society. And after that review, they can dismiss it or refer to a committee for further assessment. And from there, the Conduct Committee, which is made up of the Law Society's Board of Directors, also known as Benters, so you might have heard of this term before, and also volunteer lawyers, decides what happens next. And they can order, for example, a hearing, they could direct more investigation, direct an alternate form of intervention, or dismiss the matter and issue a caution. So, if it does go to a hearing and the lawyer is found to have committed what we call conduct deserving of sanction, then the outcomes can range from a reprimand or fine, or all the way to possibly suspension or disbarment.
But this is different from making mistakes in practice, though, that create a problem for clients, right? Because I know that that can happen. As a law student, this actually all sounds very overwhelming. Like, is the standard perfection for when you're practicing the law?
You make one mistake
You're
and
out.
you'll never practice again. No, I'm just joking. Okay, this is why like sound bites are so dangerous if
Yeah.
you take it out of context. Okay, so there's nuance here about providing legal services to clients competently. So our code of conduct has a section about competency expected of every lawyer. And that competence standard, if you look at the comments, the commentary about it, it doesn't actually require perfection. But as lawyers, we do need to be knowledgeable, skilled, and capable in practice, and also aware of our own limitations. And if we do make a mistake that affects our client, then there are rules about how to deal with that. So, for example, lawyers are required to have insurance to protect themselves and also their clients when things go wrong, and also to promptly notify their insurer and client of any mistakes that they make.
Well, since we're talking about questionable conduct, I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the steamy lawyer romance tropes that we see on TV all the time.
Yeah, Lindsey, don't get me started on this. I feel like my inner Judge Judy or Judgy Judy, I suppose, is totally coming out for this one. So we have our lovely exhibits here. This first one from Allie McBeal. I think this is Allie with like a coworker, perhaps. Okay. Um, and also, of course, for all the Good Wife fans, Alicia Florrick and Will Gardner. So yeah, next case with the Cupid and the Code of Conduct. So with these TV shows, you often see lawyers engaging in these steamy romances and encounters, often with clients, each other, and even expert witnesses. And in reality, there are just all sorts of significant ethical issues that arise in real world law with these steamy romances and encounters. Okay. And sometimes these storylines involve a lawyer and their client. So for those who may have remember Ally McBeal back in the day, they did explore some of these types of romances. But what never gets explored on TV, I think, is a huge ethical issue behind all of that. Lawyers have a duty to avoid conflicts of interest. And a conflict exists anytime there's a real risk that a lawyer's own interests could affect their judgment or loyalty to a client. And because of that, lawyers cannot just simply act for a client when they're in a conflict, except in very rare, well-defined situations. So a romantic relationship with the client or even a former client, okay, that can create a conflict of interest. Okay. Another classic TV trope is also the workplace romance with a power imbalance. So like the classic, was it the partner or senior lawyer getting involved with a junior associate, right? You see this in The Good Wife with that exhibit right there with Alicia Florrick and Will Gardner. I think Alicia was, more of the junior associate in that dynamic, and Will was, of course, partner at that firm. And, TV often also extends the romantic dynamic to even other folks, right? To expert witnesses. So think Diane Lockhart and Kurt McVeigh in the Good Wife series, also with investigators, even opposing counsel. All of this makes for dramatic storytelling, right? But even when the relationship doesn't involve a client, there are still major ethical issues or red flags in real world law. Power differentials matter, okay? Coercion, exploitation, or any form of unwelcome conduct can cross into sexual harassment, and that's taken very seriously, okay? Our Lawyers Code of Conduct actually has an entire section, Chapter 6, devoted to lawyer relationships with employees and others. And it includes rules like, for example, a lawyer must not harass a colleague, employee, client, or anyone. A lawyer must not sexually harass a colleague, employee, client, or anyone. And the code even lays out examples of what counts as sexual harassment. Everything from leering, displaying sexualized images, to unwanted attention, to communications with sexual overtones, to outright advances.
Okay, and I've definitely seen all of that on law TV shows. And I understand a lot of workplaces have rules against dating coworkers and against harassment, so that makes sense. But why would it be a conflict of interest to date a client or an expert witness? Like if everyone is a consenting adult, then why can't they smooch in the elevator? What's wrong with that?
Hey, well, that's a fair point to make, Lindsay. And in real life, too, yes, people can be attracted to each other, right? They do fall in love in all sorts of settings, workplaces included. Probably every HR person's worst nightmare. You can't control attraction or feelings. But even if it's a consensual relationship or encounter, practically speaking, it becomes especially problematic when a lawyer's steamy romance or encounter raises questions about their professional integrity and judgment. Okay. So for example, does their relationship or encounter raise questions about favoritism, right? Does being in such a relationship or dynamic lead to information sharing, especially confidential information sharing that may affect a case or file they're working on? How will a relationship dynamic affect a client or employer's reputation or workplace? What happens in case of a relationship breakdown and you still must work together? So these are all real life ethical issues. And the other important aspect of all of this is, this is also a reputational one, okay, for lawyers and also our justice system as a whole. whether these types of steamy romances or encounters, or really any type of conduct that will bring the administration of justice in disrepute, which is a key principle that's repeated throughout our code of conduct. It's something, that's serious, right? Another thing I want to mention here is that integrity is also written right into Section 2 of our code. Okay, lawyers have a duty to carry out their work and their interactions with others honorably and with integrity. And if that integrity is lacking, the lawyer's usefulness to the client and reputation within their profession will be destroyed, okay, regardless of how competent that lawyer may be. And that applies to personal life too. Like if you look at the commentary in the code, if a lawyer's behavior, even outside the office, is serious enough that it could undermine a client's trust, the law society can be justified in taking disciplinary action, okay? And yes, there are real consequences, right? In real life and unlike TV, similar to how even like workplace romances are handled, it translates into lawyers having to make or should be making choices to avoid situations that could compromise their own integrity and professionalism. So for example, in reality, you're not going to be on the same file, not in the same department, or just not working together at all, with your lover or paramour or crush or whatever it is, right? And we've even seen disciplinary cases, sometimes very public ones, where inappropriate conduct, relationships, or encounters have led to complaints, suspensions, and even significant consequences, including resignations and disbarment. And some of you may have heard about a recent case in the media with the Crown prosecutor getting involved with a victim of crime in a file that they were prosecuting. And on the surface, it looked like maybe it was a consensual situation, but it ended up with a lawyer resigning as their disciplinary case was underway. So really, consensual or not, any conduct that puts a lawyer's professional integrity or public trust in the profession into question, the Law Society takes that seriously. So while TV lawyers might have these dramatic professional, personal lives with all kinds of ethical issues and just red flags mixing and bleeding all together, real life lawyers are held to a very different standard, and much stricter standards with real potential consequences for everyone involved.
Well, one thing that the shows definitely get right is that relationships can lead to major drama. I guess it sounds like. But what's not sexy or romantic is losing your legal career over an inappropriate romance. So we'll just avoid that.
Okay, yeah, I concur. And this is where I'm done with my Judge Judy moment here. And this this feels like Gavel moment, like where's my gavel when I need one? Yeah, you banished it, so it's gone.
It's in jail, sorry.
Yeah. So we do have time for one more hot take. And really in the work that we do, we think that the most heroic and admirable folks are the lawyers working in the access to justice space. And of course, all the frontline professionals and community service providers who we refer to as justice navigators who help navigate people to getting legal help. So Lindsey, take it away with the last case.
All right. Our last case here is the case of fees and freebies. Now, this last myth touches on an important issue that is really rarely discussed on TV, that the average Canadian is unlikely to be able to afford the services of the kinds of lawyers that we see on our favorite TV shows. In my favorite show here, Drop Dead Diva, this exhibit is pictured from there. This is Pro Bono Man and Lady Adjudicator. Now, in this scene, it's one of those myths being perpetuated that litigators at top law firms take on cases for free to be courtroom heroes. But in reality, nonprofit organizations really do the majority of the heavy lifting to ensure access to justice. And that means that people can get the legal help that they need. Access to justice is a real and worsening issue in Canada, and it's important for the public to know the best routes to get appropriate legal help. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Obviously, lawyers' fees are rarely discussed on TV because it doesn't add a lot to the story. But they love this juicy storyline that involves like a penniless but morally blameless individual coming to a big law firm to seek help. And then that slick, very competent lawyer saves the day and goes and represents them in court for free. And sometimes firms do pro bono work, meaning that they will take on a case without pay. But the majority of free or reduced cost legal services are not provided by lawyers at big firms, but instead by nonprofit organizations, and usually for people who meet specific eligibility criteria. So, for example, there's Legal Aid Alberta, which provides affordable legal services in family law, domestic violence, child welfare, immigration, and youth and adult criminal defense. There's also student legal services at the University of Alberta, where law students who are supervised by lawyers help provide free legal information and sometimes help with representation in court. And Duty Counsel is a free service that's available to people in courtrooms that just provides brief legal advice to any Albertan, regardless of their outcome. Regardless of their income. And there's also community legal clinics, like our friends at the Edmonton Community Legal Center. But there are a lot of resources, and the Law Society of Alberta has a list of approved legal service providers for the public on its website. And we at CPLEA also have a list of legal help options on our website. And of course, our legal education and information resources at CPLEA, like this webinar, are all free for everyone to use. So please spread the word. There's a lot of good content on CPLEA in just about every area of law.
So right here. So, before we wrap up, let's quickly revisit the legal myths that we put on trial today, and also the real life truths behind them. And of course, if the audience, you have some thoughts, please pop them in, I believe, into our chat box there as well, and we'll see if we could get to them at the end. But if not, we might follow up with an email then. But Lindsey, let's do our quick recap.
All right, courtroom attire, pink and robes. Lawyers sadly do not get to dress however they want in court. Sad for me, I do love a costume moment. But court attire in Canada is rule-bound, varies by province, and yes, sometimes requires robes, but never wigs. Number 2, the judge's gavel, Scheindlin and Gavel. Judges do not use gavels in Canadian courts, not ever, and not even Judge Judy. No matter how vividly I remember her having one, she didn't.
Okay, number 3. Court timelines, swift justice and due process. Real legal cases are not resolved in one TV episode. They take months and often years, with rules of court shaping the process.
Number 4, surprise evidence, the case of happenstance and evidence. Evidence follows strict rules, no surprise reveals, no confessions from the real killer, and discovery happens long before anyone enters the courtroom.
Okay, number 5, lawyer stereotypes, specters and solicitors. So there are all sorts of lawyers in different practice settings with different expertise, everyday work, and believe it or not, different values and personalities. So what you see on TV is just a stereotype. Okay, many lawyers and law students do read documents though, and interpret laws until their eyeballs fall out.
The pain is real. Number 6, who can practice law? The case of Antics and ethics. In Alberta, remember, only active members of the Law Society can practice law or give legal advice. Don't ask me for legal advice. I don't know anything. But there are limited carve-outs for students at law, or also known as articling students, to do that kind of work under the supervision of an active member of the Law Society.
Yes, and to add on to that, like I mentioned before, with lawyers that practice in-house, don't ask them for legal advice either, because they're not actually insured to provide legal advice to the public. So wanted to add that point. Number 7, lawyer oversight, wild, wild west and oversight. So real lawyers are regulated and held to high professional standards with real consequences for misconduct.
And that also applies to non-practicing lawyers. They still have code of conduct that they need to adhere to. Yeah. Number 8.
Yeah, I think this one's me, right? This
okay, it is. Yeah,
relationships moment, Cupid and code of conduct. So conflicts of interest, harassment rules, integrity, and power dynamics make legal TV show romances ethical red flags in real life.
And number 9, pro bono and free legal help, the case of fees and freebies. Most free or reduced cost legal help in Alberta is provided by Legal Aid, community legal clinics, student programs, Duty Counsel, and legal information and education nonprofits like CPLEA. So
really, at the end of the day, I'd say if you want drama, go watch legal TV. Okay.
We love it.
Yeah, we love it. We love it too. Okay. But like I mentioned, practice of law school ruins that. But if you want accurate legal information, come to us. We will ruin the drama for everyone. Okay. Real life law operates with rules, processes, ethics, timelines, and responsibilities that more often than not doesn't make it to the screen. So just a little bit as a plug for our webinar series as well. We do actually have a webinar coming up in January where we're going to be busting some common legal myths about Canadian legal culture. So stay tuned for that as part of our myth busting webinar series for the new year. And really, I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us today. It's a little bit of a different format than some of our previous webinars. If you're a regular, I guess, fan of our webinars. And I'd say, barring any questions, thoughts, or comments, I'd say this webinar is now adjourned. Thanks, everyone.